Now, from the Signature Bank studio.
I'll go so far as to say I was relatively uninformed because politics didn't affect my life. I want to tell stories. I want to sing and dance. When some Broadway stars turned their Instagrams over to black performers to explain their experiences, Osnes joined the cause. She also posted about the importance of COVID tests and wearing masks. By the summer of 2021, some theaters were planning productions with rapidly changing rules rolled out to align with public health recommendations. A venue in the Hamptons that had brought on Suzanne Stroman to direct a one-night-only production of Crazy for You, scheduled for August 29, 2021. Laura Osnes, agreed to play the lead role. She got an email, a month or so in advance, from the director. The Guild is requiring everyone to show their vaccination card. I'm sending a private email to everyone, blah, blah, blah. Laura, who knew the director, I so appreciate the respectful email and totally understand. I know it's become a very controversial subject. I'm in the minority within our New York City community. Haha, but I'm not currently vaccinated. May end up doing so down the line. But for the moment, Nate and I have decided, I guess that's her husband, to wait until we know a bit more. With variants and resurgence, I get why Guildhall is requiring, this is the theater in the Hamptons, it's requiring it. I'm very bummed to have to lose this particular gig for that reason. Let me know if I can help or if you need any other info on my end. Lots of love. The director replied, I'm bummed too, but I respect your decision. Thanks for letting me know. I love you and we'll be together again someday, and so on and so forth. Theater folk. Graceful handling among friends. She thought that was the end of it, except it wasn't. Because the Mean Girls over at Page 6 and in the art section at the New York Post got wind of this and ran a story that cast her in the worst possible light as having been fired and, essentially being some sort of anti-vax ideologue and so on and so forth. And then people texted her, I'm so sorry about the article, and this is terrible what's happening. But the reaction, as the account in the Free Press of her story offers, the reaction to the Post story from the Broadway community was immediate. The former princess was suddenly a villain. And people piled on, as they're wont to do, mob mentality among the sheep. The influential On-Stage blog referred to Osnes' vaccine decision as, quote, one of the highest acts of selfishness you could do for this industry, unquote. And you got all the ad hominem in her direction, death threats, she said. People she thought as friends attacked her on social media. 4 bookings were immediately canceled. The most hurtful thing was that people found out this one thing about me and the vaccine, and nothing else in my character, even my work, mattered anymore. All these assumptions were made about who I was, and no one defended me. And so she's still around, but she's mostly talked about, and she's only 39 or 40 years old, she's mostly talked about in the past tense. Oh, she used to be great. Even now, 4 years later, people are still careful from this article. The situation, one booker, one theater influencer, situation was handled, the way the situation was handled, unfortunately, was a loss for all involved. Well, that's what happens when you throw in with a mob. The pangs of regret among some. But it's just an interesting story about a talented artist whose career got sidelined because of this and because of the nature, how ghastly these COVIDians, who are all identitarians too, Venn diagram, perfect circle, how nasty they were and how much damage they caused, both in terms of public health, in terms of free speech, in terms of people's actual careers and livelihoods and lives. More on this topic. We're pleased to be joined by Stephen Kirsch, who is a tech entrepreneur and philanthropist. He's also the executive director of the Vaccine Safety Research Foundation and the founder of the COVID-19 Early Treatment Fund. You can read his work at Kirsch, Kirsch, KirschSubstack.com. Steve Kirsch, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good to be here, Dan. It's a horrible story you just related.
Right. I mean, with 4 years or so removed from this, I think a lot of us have forgotten all the horrible stories, all the horrible acts that were committed, in a professional sense, in addition to personal, how badly people were treated, people with disabilities, how badly they were treated because they couldn't communicate with people wearing masks and so on and so forth. I just don't think we should forget how barbaric some people were to people who made a different decision about the vaccine in particular.
Yeah, totally. And it was completely unjustified. I mean, I don't know how the New York Post found out about that story, but I thought that she handled it extremely well. I would not have been nearly as nice in responding to the offer, but she was totally gracious. And so, my concern is that this is not just happening then, but I think there's probably a lot of that still happening today. And what's really tragic about this is that the whole vaccine thing was a little bit like saying, well, you can't work unless you take this poison. And because that's what the vaccines ended up being. The vaccines, when you look at the data, and I've spent a lot of time looking at the data from the Czech Republic because it's the only publicly available record-level data that actually shows what the COVID vaccine did. And when you look at it, it turns out that the vaccine didn't benefit anyone. That if you compare people with similar mortality rates and similar frailties against each other, you'll find that they had exactly the same response during non-COVID as during COVID, meaning that there was no differential response whether they're vaccinated versus unvaccinated, which means that the vaccine didn't actually do anything for reducing your risk of dying from COVID. So when people were asked to do this in order to save lives, in fact, it was a complete mirage. It was just caused by the fact that people who choose to be unvaccinated tended to have higher frailty and higher mortality than people who chose to be vaccinated of the same age. And that has nothing to do with the vaccine. It has to do with their choices. And so all of these studies come out and they compare people of the same age, but they should have been comparing people with the same mortality, which is different than the same age when you're dealing with vaccinated and unvaccinated. And they would have found out that the vaccine actually did nothing, but it did. The vaccine did increase your risk of dying. And so you're being asked to take a death shot, and if you don't take a death shot, then we're going to deplatform you, for the rest of your career. And that just makes no sense. But people are being fooled into believing what they're being told by health authorities, which is simply not true. And there's nobody who will debate me on this data and what it shows. They all decline.
Well, a couple things. One, death shot. Obviously, there were hundreds of millions of people who took the shot and didn't die, right? So, it's not a death shot in that sense. Is that fair?
No, it just increased your risk of dying by 5 to 10%, depending on what your age was.
And so you're saying, I know you have this drill down. I read it about the increase. Both mRNA shots increased all-cause mortality. But you're saying no one, even two people similarly situated in terms of age and comorbidities, no one was benefited by the mRNA shot. That's a big claim.
No, as far as I can tell. And nobody's shown me any graphs that show me that that's not true. So I've got a bet with a guy, Starwill, and we have $3.3 million on the table. And I produced a graph and I showed that, look, if you have people with the same two groups with the same mortality rate and the same comorbidity, and one group is vaccinated with the COVID vaccine and the other group is not vaccinated, that the increase in mortality during COVID waves was exactly the same. And he produced no graph that falsified that.
Well,
so it had no impact. It didn't matter whether you were vaccinated or unvaccinated. The whole effect was because of differences in mortality and frailty and not because of the COVID shot.
Well, so, I mean, setting aside the vaccine absolutists, the proselytizers, but people that are respected medical professionals in the Trump administration, people like Marty Makary at FDA, what is he looking at then when he says, yeah, if you were old, I mean, this is his position as far as I understand it, still to this day, we talked to him many times during COVID. Yeah, it's right, for what we all came to learn, and the public health establishment had to basically admit at some point was, yeah, for kids it didn't make sense, young healthy people didn't make sense, but for older people with comorbidities there was a benefit. So what are those people looking at or misinterpreting?
Well, they're looking at the wrong thing. They're stratifying people by ages and by vaccination status, and they're saying that if you have two 80-year-olds and one's vaccinated and one is unvaccinated, then the unvaccinated 80-year-old is going to die more. And that's true, but it's not true because of the COVID vaccine. It's true because of selection bias. And none of those people are ever going to show me the record level data showing that if you have people where you equalize the mortality and the frailty of the two cohorts, that they won't be able to show a difference between whether during COVID as to whether one got the vaccine or not. So all of these differences are simply statistical mirages because people have been trained to think that, if you have people of different ages, they have the same mortality, and that's simply not true when you're dealing with vaccinated and unvaccinated. And there were a couple of different papers. One is out of Denmark, and the other one is out of Qatar, and both of them showed that all these statistical techniques that epidemiologists use to try to normalize and equalize the groups for doing these observational studies after the fact, they showed that they can't neutralize out what's called a healthy vaccine effect. And they said that the only way we're going to be able to tell whether the vaccine worked is through randomized clinical trials, which, of course, they did before, and it didn't show a death benefit. So these epidemiologists had to give up. And a lot of people aren't aware of those two papers. And so they think that these studies that were done are on the level, but in fact, the studies were confounded by what's called the healthy vaccine effect, which has to do with the differences in mortality and the frailty of the two groups. You cannot age match like you can do for most other things in epidemiology, and most epidemiologists do not understand the difference, the subtleties there.
Yeah, there's a Yale epidemiologist, Harvey Risch, who took a lot of heat because he's very well regarded and certainly not anti-vax, but he penned a piece or did a study that found 600,000 unexplained excess deaths not associated with COVID between 21 and 23. And that was one of the, sort of the first things where I was like, what? So, we need some sort of explanation for this. And has there been any sort of explanation other than what you're suggesting? And is that an extrapolation, or is there a body of evidence that can point to the vaccines as the a contributing cause or maybe the preeminent cause for those unexplained deaths?
Well, nobody has come up with a more likely cause than it was the COVID shot. Right, you get the COVID shot, and you can do what's called the time series, event time series analysis of the mortality of what happens when people get the shots. Now, if the shots do nothing, then your mortality doesn't change. It's like if you had a glass of water, your chance of death after having a glass of water doesn't change. But what you can do is you can take this record level data in the Czech Republic, and you can look at what are the death numbers in terms of deaths per week of people relative to the time that they got the shot. And what you find is that it rises for about 20 weeks or so, and then it flatlines, and then it starts going the other way, which means that for the first 20 weeks or so, you have elevated risk. And in the first week after shot number, after the first shot, there's this huge spike, and there isn't one for the second shot. So you can see right there, just from the week one data, that wow, there's this huge bump for the first shot, but there's not for the second shot. Now that can't happen. It's dose dependent. It can't happen if it wasn't all-cause mortality, and that stays with you for over a year.
And we're only 4 years removed, really. So we still don't fully understand the long-term implications, particularly if you took multiple shots. Is that true?
It affects different people differently. Some people it won't affect at all, and other people are going to be dramatically affected. There was a survey by Rasmussen Reports that was just published, and it showed that 10% of the people who took the COVID vaccine reported serious side effects. Now, that's insane. Vaccines are supposed to be the safest product that you can find, and yet they're the only products that have complete liability protection. Mm-hmm. And if you're a critical thinker, that makes no sense. Look, the vaccines are supposed to be given to healthy people to protect them from getting a disease. It's not supposed to cause any kind of mortality or morbidity on its own. It's supposed to protect you. So they're supposed to be the safest products on Earth. So how is it that the safest products on Earth are the only products in the United States that have complete liability protection? What sense does that make? They should be the last product on Earth that has complete liability protection because they're supposed to be the safest. And yet, that's simply not true.
Steve Kirsch is a tech entrepreneur and philanthropist, executive director of the Vaccine Safety Research Foundation, founder of the COVID-19 Early Treatment Fund as well. You can read his writings and research at kirschsubstack.com. Steve Kirsch, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Sure. Anytime.
And happy Thanksgiving. And Steve Kirsch joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer. Fearless conversations and sharp analysis of the stories that matter. It's the Aaron Mullins Show, now available on the Salem Podcast Network.
I do find it a little bit off-putting when someone has a history of calling others out for being complicit via their silence to then occupy that space themselves. The hypocrisy is the issue I have.
The Aaron Mullins Show on the Salem Podcast Network. Subscribe today on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or at salempodcastnetwork.com. AM 560, The Answer.